what I want to do today is the following, and that is based upon the insight, one of the myriad of insights of Moreno Rabbeinu Hagaon, Professor Shaul Lieberman, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, my teacher and the teacher of many here. Professor Lieberman, on many occasions, would tell us that every halacha grew out of a Maaseh Shehoya. That every halacha was not something a group of rabbis sitting down and saying, okay, this is what the law should be, but it arose out of cases, and cases that jurists call landmark cases, and then eventually it becomes codified into the halacha. But you have to see the basis, what's called the Zitzim Leben of a halacha. And so I want to give you a Maaseh. I want to give you a Maaseh about a certain well-known Jewish family whom I have known 3 generations of, a well-known Jewish family, and I'm not telling tales out of school, all these are matters of public record, how it illustrates that conversion today, as both Dr. Boehm and Rabbi Lopatin have indicated, is something that is not quite something that's unusual or just a matter of emergency situation, but reflects an entire different social and cultural milieu. The example that I want to give is the most distinguished Jewish scholar and thinker who ever taught in my university, the University of Toronto, where I've been teaching now for close to 20 years, was the late Professor Emil Fackenheim. I've known Professor Fackenheim for many, many years. Emil Fackenheim, born in 1916, the rise of Hitler in Europe. He was originally planning on being a philosopher, which he later became, but of course the universities were closed to Jews, went to the Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums, the liberal rabbinical seminary in Berlin, became a rabbi, came to Canada. Fascinating story, he came in Canada, how Jewish refugees were put in internment camps with German Nazis, because they were all considered foreigners. Eventually comes out of the camp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, gets a doctorate at the University of Toronto, and then became one of the most distinguished professors there. Professor Fackenheim, his late wife Rose, was not Jewish. In fact, she was a practicing Christian. And to get ahead of our story, she did not actually convert to Judaism long after their children were born, when they finally made Aliyah. When he made Aliyah in 1981, after retiring from the University of Toronto, Mrs. Fackenheim formally converted to Judaism. Okay, so Emil Fackenheim, who was a Reform rabbi, had actually served a Reform congregation in Hamilton, Ontario, was married to Rose Fackenheim. And this created a considerable problem in the Jewish community. In fact, I know it for a fact, that it was a rule when I was a student in the Jewish Theological Seminary from Dr. Finkelstein Zatzal himself, that nobody who was intermarried was allowed to lecture, and therefore Emil Fackenheim was never invited to lecture in the seminary because of that. Okay. Now, Emil Fackenheim lived in Toronto and was a member of the Shara Shemayim congregation, the congregation of the shul that I daven in Chicago, in Toronto, I should say. And the rabbi at that time was, not probably, but I think definitely, the most distinguished intellectual in the North American, I have to say North American because I'm in Canada, North American Orthodox rabbi, the late Rabbi Walter Wurzburger. Not only was he the rabbi of the congregation that Emil Fackenheim was a member, but Rabbi Wurzburger was also a fellow German Jew in a community where there were actually very few German Jews, both born and raised in Germany. And he officiated at the conversion of the 3 children of Emil Fackenheim. 3 children, Rabbi Fackenheim, at considerable criticism in the community, And in fact, there was quite a to-do, people still tell me about it, when their son was bar mitzvah, and the tradition in that congregation is that the father and the mother kind of walk out with the bar mitzvah boy on the way to the kiddush, and when Mrs. Fackenheim joined the procession, there was an outcry. Somebody stood up, I protest, what is going on? Now, interestingly enough, the agreement was that these children were to be raised as Jews to such an extent that Rose Fackenheim, who regularly attended church on Sunday morning, kept a strictly kosher home. And Shabbat was observed strictly in the home. She kept her part of the bargain and whatever. Now, this is a situation for which Rabbi Wurzburger was criticized. And Rabbi Wurzburger was certainly, I would say, and I'm saying this advisedly, that the two most closest disciples of the great Rabbi Yosef Ber Halevi Soloveitchik Zatzal were his son-in-law, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, and Walter Wurzburger. I think they were the two most closest disciples of this very great man. So therefore, Rabbi Wurzburger had, approved of this situation, and when I once discussed it with him, because after he had left Toronto, later on, my last synagogue was in Far Rockaway, and he was rabbi in Lawrence, which is the next town. I once discussed it with him. We used to ride on the A train, which is the longest subway ride in New York. I'm teaching philosophy at City University, and he was at Yeshiva University. Longest ride. The only good news is you always got a seat in the morning because it was the first stop on the subway. But I once discussed it with him, and he said that he felt that this was, and I'm sure he discussed it with Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Shita of the Rambam. The Rambam, in the end of the 14th chapter of Hilchot Isurei Bia, says, well, after all, Gior is, Kabbalat Oshel Mitzvot, accepting the mitzvot and the proper meal and tefillah. Okay, but especially the Kabbalat Oshel Mitzvot. But is that really an ikuv or not? Is that something that's a sine qua non or something that's simply minimum v'char? And he pointed out, and this Rambam he referred to, is that the Rambam says, what about all these wives that Shlomo married, or Shimshon, and whatever? Clearly, these were conversions of convenience, to put it mildly, and whatever. And the Rambam there says, very interestingly enough, he said, look, basically, you accept it de facto, you accept it as a fact, as a halachic fact. However, wait and see how they turn out. Wait and see how they turn out. If they turn out in a way that it's totally insincere, then really, you don't marry them. You don't do this, you don't do that, or whatever. But at least at that particular point, this was the view of the Rambam. Interestingly enough, the Rambam, if you look at something like the sheet of the Rambam, the position of the Rambam was definitely in favor of proselytizing. Two sources. Number one, there's a famous tshuva where he said we're allowed to teach Torah to Christians because if Christians actually study the Torah with proper perushim, their problem is they got bad perushim, but they believe in Torah min hashamayim, yachzoru lemutav, they will return to their primordial good. The Rambam also says the fifth mitzvah in Sefer Mitzvah, the fifth mitzvah aseh, is Kiddush Hashem, which he says lefarsem dat ha'emet, to literally proclaim the true faith. So this fits into the whole shita of the Rambam. So this is what happened in the case of Professor Fackenheim. And Professor Fackenheim would tell many people, this is what I did, but I'm not telling anybody else that they should do. This is, Yetzer Hara, not in a broad sense. That was the case. And as I say, finally, Mrs. Fackenheim did convert, but the children had to be converted. Now, the story gets better. Emil and Rose Fackenheim's youngest son, Yossi Fackenheim, is an actor in Israel. Yossi Fackenheim served in the army, the whole bit, got married, and he and his wife, the marriage broke up. So he went to the Rabbanut to say that, we're getting married, we're going to give a get. And the worldly, sophisticated rabbi who interviewed him said, well, what's your background? Oh, well, I was converted as a child. Well, are you frum now? No. You don't need a get. You were never Jewish. Now, I know what this rabbi was basing it on. And here again, halachic decisions on major issues are never just halachic decisions. In other words, when you have 2 or 3 different halachic options, there are other factors that are going to be the kotuv hashlishi machriya b'nehim that's going to determine how you do it. Now, The fact there is, I know what he's basing it on. He was basing himself, there's a machloket Rishonim, a number of Rishonim talk about where in the Gemara in Ketubot Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, it's a question of the conversion of a child, yesh biyado limchot, that the child actually afterwards, when reaching the age of majority, has the power to repudiate the conversion, because if you were converted against your will, which obviously if as a child you were, then you can't obligate somebody against their will. Now, the machloket among Rishonim is, does the person have to be told that? No, what if the person just passes age 13? Nothing happens. Most Rishonim say, most, not all, most Rishonim say that this person, him, or probably herself as well, because at the age of 12, in a day, that this person themselves has to come forth and say, I don't want it. If somehow or other, if they just shave the altas and nothing is done, then ipso facto, it's the case. But there are others who say that no. Rav Moshe Feinstein, for example, in one Shuvah said that the person should actually be told, look, this is the case, you've got to affirm Judaism. And in fact, I'll tell you something in terms of my rabbinic experience when this was the case, when children had been converted, and I was very reticent about converting children with a non-Jewish parent. But I would say that this also people who would especially who had adopted virtually all children now, there are no Jewish children available for adoption, and therefore I would say the bar mitzvah here is really more significant, bar mitzvah, because it really is, this is your choice, as opposed to those of us who there's nothing, no consent there in terms of your being a Jew. So in this case, and it became a cause célèbre of Yossi Fackenheim. Became a cause célèbre in Yossi Fackenheim in Israel after Professor Emil Fackenheim, a distinguished Jewish philosopher, a right-wing Zionist, and whatever. And this was the case. And interestingly enough, here's a case of where popular opinion in the religious community has an effect on decisions of rabbis. It's kind of a puchazeh b'da'ama davar. In other words, in that sense, it is that there was such an outcry that Professor Fackenheim, who had made Aliyah, and his wife and had finally converted and everything else, like suddenly this is the case. So this rabbi, who originally said he didn't want to get, said, well, it's a suffix, and it's a suffix d'oraita l'chumra, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll give him again. He really doesn't need one, but, just to be on the safe side. But this is the case of where, within the religious community, this type of attitude. You saw this in two other cases in Israel that involved questions of Jewish identity, where the view of the religious people, of the community, because of loyalty to the Jewish people, even if there's ambiguous loyalty, ambivalent loyalty to the Torah itself. Two cases. Number one, the famous Langer case, the case where the brother, the sister, who had been heroes of the Milchemet Sheshet Yamim, the Six-Day War, and it was discovered that their mother had been married before, and before she married Langer, a man named Barakovsky, and the late Rabbi Goren, in a tshuva that I once wrote a critical review of it, I thought there was a better way to handle the problem, said, well, no, Barakovsky's conversion was really problematic and whatever. It was not Rabbi Goren at his best, with all due respect to Rabbi Goren. May he have a lichtig Gan Eden. But that was the case, plus the fact there was a case of the Ethiopians. The Ethiopians, it was back and forth and back, and finally they rely on the tshuva of the Radbaz that says they're really from Shevet Dan and whatever, but it was the religious community. These people risked their lives to come to Israel if there's some kind of a suffix, and there Rabbi Goren had a marvelous solution. Rabbi Goren's solution was, which nobody adopted, he said, look, if we say Malin Bakodesh, that going to Eretz Yisrael is a going higher, and if there's Tumat Eretz Hamim, if there's kind of a Tumah living outside, so when you're going to Israel, why don't we make everybody have a Tevilah when they come to Israel? It'd be like a Gilgal Shavua. Everybody will have a Tevilah, and therefore they will be included in the Tevilah. There's a Yerushalmi at the end of the third parak of Kedushin, which says of a woman questionable, did she have a proper conversion or not, if it was known that she had gone to a mikveh, even for purposes of Nida. It was L'Shem Kedushat Yisrael, and B'diavad, it was considered to be, even if there had not been a bet in. So this becomes examples of where it is not just the type of open-mindedness and sensitivity to situations that Rabbi Lopatin so wonderfully described for us. But it means, the question is that when poskim deal with this type of a question, when they deal with issues of a great debate, then it is a question of what do they consider to be the important issues at stake. Halachic questions that you can simply look up the answer in the Shulchan Aruch or wherever are easy questions. Professor David Weiss-Livna Yabod L'chaim, our teacher and master, and certainly the inspiration behind our entire UTJ, once said about a certain posek that I'll leave nameless. He said, the reason his tshuvas are so long is the shilas are so easy. In other words, if it's a question that so many people have asked, so you say 200 poskim said this and 197 said that, so, but the Ruba Azlinen, you follow according to the majority. But I mean, the point is that the difficult shalas that really deal with these fundamental issues where we have fundamentally changed circumstances require the type of halachic ingenuity, which is not just manipulating sources, but understanding what are the underlying principles, what are the underlying purposes, what are the underlying ends of the halacha, what are we trying to do. Now, in this case, though, I would like to get back to the Fackenheim situation and indicate why I think that the approach of Rabbi Wurzburger was the correct approach. Why didn't Rabbi Wurzburger insist that Rose Fackenheim convert to Judaism? I didn't insist that. I didn't really discuss it with him, but I knew him well enough to understand where he was coming from. The point is that had this been a conversion, yes, it would have been a proper conversion. There would have been bet-in and there would have been tefillah, and okay. But however, she was clearly not prepared to accept upon herself a Jewish identity. In other words, unlike some of the Messianic Jews, whom I've had many discussions with, you can't be both. In other words, there was a time that Christians could be Jews, Jews could be Christians, but clearly for the past 2,000 years that's not been the case. So therefore, until she was prepared to give up her commitment to Christianity, then she was in no position to, in good faith, take upon herself the Olshel mitzvot. And I think that was the correct approach. The correct approach was, and I myself would frequently do that with people who were, wanted to intermarry. I would say, don't go to those Reform rabbis who conduct a ceremony that saying Kedat Moshe Yisrael, which is Tovil b'mikveh b'sheres b'yodo. It's Satrei Hadodi. It's totally contradictory. Have a civil marriage, and then see what happens, and then see how you're going to raise the children and whatever. But then the pressure is off. And there's less and less pressure today it used to be the pressure was, my mother will kill herself if we don't have a conversion. It's much less and less of that. And in fact, there's a tshuva, a very famous tshuva. Rabbi Angel is referred to in a number of cases because of his Sephardic tradition of the Rishon LeZion, Rabbi Zion Meir Chai Uziel Zatzal. In his tshuvot, he said to a rabbi in Istanbul in 1944, where somebody was talking about this, and he said, look, today, he said, people don't have to convert to get married. They can go to City Hall and have a civil marriage. Turkey was very secular in those days. So therefore, in those cases, the idea that this is the only option is either a Jewish marriage or a Christian marriage, is you have civil marriage, and why bother with any of it? So in this case, if the pressure is off, then actually, if there's going to be a conversion of the non-Jewish spouse, when the pressure is off, it might come a little bit later. It might come as part of a process, but it's likely to be more sincere and indeed more effective, as opposed to a conversion done under pressure. Now, I was at a very interesting debate. It was about 3.5 years ago in Israel at the Van Leer Center. There was a debate between Rabbi Riskin and a Haredi Rosh Yeshiva, I think a Rabbi Weingarten. And this was the time that there was the great the great dispute in Israel about the conversions of Rav Druckmann. Remember the conversions of Rav Druckmann? Druckmann apparently was converting large numbers of Russians married to Jews, and the Rabbinut was declaring that these conversions were invalid, et cetera, and it was going on. And basically, Rabbi Riskin was defending that position, and this Rabbi Weingarten was arguing against it. Well, one of the things that's always I think delightful is that when stereotypes in the Jewish community are belied. Now, if you were to look at the political lay of the map in the Jewish world, you would say that myself, and I don't speak on behalf of the UTJ, but our general point of view, that we're to the left of Rabbi Riskin. Left of Rabbi Riskin. Okay. Rabbi Weingarten is obviously to the right. So therefore, if Riskin is mekal, if he's lenient in this area, then kol shekain, all the more so I should be. I shocked some people there by agreeing with Weingarten. I said, I don't think that conversion, this is the way to go. I think that it's disingenuous. I think it's using basically a religious institution for political purposes. I think there's another way to go about it and to deal with this kind of a question. So in that way, this was, it's always good to belie those kind of differences. It reminds me of, people think that if you're on the right religiously, you're on the right politically. I have a daughter who's to the right of us religiously and to the left of us politically. I have a son who's to the left of us religiously and to the right of us politically. So, these stereotypes are, that's the case. But in terms of this becomes the question. The question is that there is Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote a very famous essay about Brit Goral, the idea of identifying yourself with the Jewish people, the fate of the Jewish people, as distinct from the more strictly Brit between God and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And there's an overlapping between the two. In other words, you cannot be devoted to the Torah of Israel without being devoted to the Jewish people with all their warts and all their problems and whatever. And on the other hand, to be devoted simply to the Jewish people without the Torah of Israel, which gives us our identity, that is also the case. So that I think that in this case, that we should definitely, in the case that Rabbi Lopatin, definitely these children should be in Jewish schools. Definitely it should be the case if, and this is the big if the child is a Jewish mother, okay, you're not going to need giur. If it's a Gentile mother, Jewish father, you are going to need giur. But the point that I'm making is that in these cases, it I think is dependent upon the fact, is the non-Jewish parent willing to agree that this child is to be raised as Jewish in a very concrete sort of way. This used to be, by the way, the position of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church would marry a Catholic and a non-Catholic, but the non-Catholic parent had to agree to raise the child as Catholic. So, Havdalah, I think that there's a certain, parallel there. But if this is the case, and I'll tell you one thing from my own rabbinic experience. My own rabbinic experience was, I remember very well, I was a rabbi in Norfolk, Virginia. And somebody came in and said, my granddaughter, et cetera, she's Jewish, but her husband's not Jewish, and we want to name the baby. And I said, I would like to speak to the baby's father. The daughter was Jewish. And he's not going to come. It was a whole big to-do. Obviously, this was something that the non-Jewish father was not going to be supportive of. It was simply done because the grandparents would feel better about it, et cetera, naming it in a shul. But it was something, and there was quite a bit of controversy in the community, that I insisted that be the case, remembering the situation very much of Rose Fackenheim. One of the things in terms of this waiting till the child is bar and bat mitzvah age to convert them, I think this is an important, then it really becomes their choice. And not forcing a conversion upon or pressuring a non-conversion is to convert, is actually something that reverts back. In the days of Bayit Sheni, in the days of the Second Temple, conversion, giur, was not an event. It's debated in the Talmud, whether you become a ger after the Milah or after the Tefillah and whatever. It was a process that sometimes took several generations. And in fact, one of the Roman poets who didn't like Jews very much, he was shocked that aristocratic Romans were being attracted to Judaism, which many of them were, by the way. The mother of Nero, for example, is that Juvenal says, look at these people, look at this distinguished Roman family. He said, the grandfather won't eat pork, the father keeps Shabbat, and they mutilate the child by circumcising him. That's a 3-generation type of process. It became a talich rather than an event, rather than a process. And I think that to a certain extent there, and the institution of the Ger Toshav, which according to one opinion in the Talmud was a 12-month waiting period before full Gior. There, in that case, therefore, I think that looking at some of these precedents and looking at the fact that, yes, we want to retain as many people as possible, but that I don't think that we should be in a situation where people are being forced to affirm things or persuaded for things that they are not yet ready. The late Franz Rosenzweig, who was certainly a great teacher of the Jewish people, who was the quintessential Baal Tshuva. When he was asked, do you put on tefillin? His answer was the famous, noch nicht, not yet. And I think that for some of these people, it's a question, no, they're not opposed. Yes, you've got to get some indication, some kind of ger toshav type status, but the not yet has to come of its own. And then I think that this is something which will be true to the Torah of Israel and to the benefit of Kol Yisrael. Amen. Rabbi Chanan ben Kasher Merotz HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakot Yisrael P'Yakrim Mitzvah Shenemar Adonai Chafetz Man Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir. Anybody saying Kaddish? Amen.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.